spiritual family, is we can share these things with each other and we can pray for each other. Okay, at this time, the children that are going to Sunday school are excused, and we're going to continue on in Genesis chapter 1. I've been thinking a lot about creation and the idea of God creating everything, the world, the universe, all living things, including human beings. And it's brought me to the conclusion, why do I find that so easy to believe? Because so many people approach that with such skepticism. And I think the reason I find it easy to believe is because I have a relationship with the Creator. And so in a sense, it's like, it seems only natural to me that he's capable of doing this. In fact, you know, the whole idea that I tried to communicate last week is that I believe God created the world and everything in it in 6 literal 24-hour periods. And I just find that easy to believe. And in fact, I think that from God's perspective, he kind of took his time. I mean, God could have just done it and there would have been done. But 6 days, it seems that God took care in creating the world, of which, as I'll mention later, he's made us stewards. And so for those who don't have a relationship with the Creator, who don't have the ability to relate to him on a personal level, it might be difficult to understand how all of this happened. But for me, it just seems like it's only natural. And so last week, I left you with an earth that was submerged in water. The light had already been separated from the darkness, and that was it. And this was in Genesis 1 through 5. And so that's where it was. So if you could just picture the first day of creation, the world is completely covered by water. There's evening and there's morning. There's day and there's night. But that's it. There's no land or life of anything other than just the earth. The second day begins with verse 6 through 8 of Genesis 1. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the middle of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Next verse. "And God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day." So firmament, sometimes translations say firmament, sometimes they translate it expanse, but basically the expanse is heaven. It's what you see when you look up. And so what we get from this text is that there's water above the earth, and then the earth is covered with water, and the expanse in between is what we would call space. So this is the second day, and a lot of commentators and scientists believe that the Bible recognizes the existence of what we would call a water vapor canopy above the earth in the early days of creation before the flood. And I remember Henry Morris talking about this in class when I was with him. And he said, this is what he said: "The waters above the firmament, or the waters that were above space, probably constituted a vast blanket of water vapor above the troposphere and possibly above the stratosphere as well, in the high temperatures region now known as the ionosphere and extending far into space." And so if you could just get a picture of this, you've got the water that covers the earth, you've got the expanse, and then above the expanse, there's a lot more water, some extending out into space. And some of the comments that I read about this, and these are mostly from Henry Morris: "It would serve as a global greenhouse, maintaining an essentially uniform, pleasant temperature all over the world." And I think this is one of the reasons why we find tropical plants in every climate zone in the world, because at one time, there was it seemed like a universally tropical climate. In other words, it was like the tropics everywhere, with plenty of water. Without great temperature variations, you have great temperature variations. When I woke up this morning, I was just like at 4,000 feet up in the mountains, and when I opened my door, some of the ice fell off. So I mean, and if you go to other places, it's very warm. And so there's great temperature variations. My son, when he left to come here during Christmas, the outside air temperature was 24 degrees below zero. But here in San Diego, it was about 65 degrees. And so with a water vapor canopy that surrounds the whole earth, you would have pretty much a universally tropical climate. And that would be different than what we experience today. Also, but this time in the history of the earth, there doesn't appear to be any rain. It had not rained yet. In fact, when God told Noah that there was going to be a great flood, and the people, I think that's the first time they saw rain. They didn't know about it. So there would be a lush, tropical-like vegetation all over the world, fed not by rain, but by a rich vaporation and condensation cycle resulting in heavy dew and ground fog. This is another interesting fact that is possible as well. The water vapor canopy would filter out ultraviolet radiation, cosmic rays, and other destructive energies bombarding this planet. You know, you can't even go out the sun for very long if you're in a place where the sun is directly shining on you without it doing harm to your body. These are known. These things coming from space are known to cause mutations, which decrease human longevity. Human and animal lifespans would be greatly increased. And so this was one of the evidences I remember that was expressed in my class with Henry Morris, is that may have been one of the reasons why people lived a longer time than they did after the flood. In fact, if you look at the flood, you see people living shorter and shorter periods of time. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So this would result in shorter, longer life periods. But then you can see, beginning after the flood, I think Noah lived like 900 years, and then it gets to 8, 7, 6, and then it finally got down to 120 years, and that's a long life, you know. But now it's even shorter than that, and it's started to come up a little bit, but it's still not like it used to be, and that could be because the climate was different, which retarded the aging process. Entropy still was working, but not at the same rate. So this water vapor canopy would also supply extra water that would be necessary for God to flood the earth during the flood, in addition to the fountains of the deep, which were broken up. There's actually more water under the earth, some say, than even in the ocean. So there's a lot of water under the earth as well. So now you've got a world that is covered with water, with a water vapor canopy above the earth, above the expanse of the earth, out into space somewhere. And how this works out, I don't know. How could you see the stars if there was a thick water vapor canopy, and what would keep it from freezing? And so there's a lot of questions that this doesn't answer. But at least it seems to be consistent with what we see in Genesis. There was the earth, which was covered by water. Then there was the expanse, which was space and heaven. And then above that, there was another large body of water. And so this begins the third day, 9 through 13. Genesis 1, 9 through 13. Then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. Next verse. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth spout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind." And you'll see this constantly in the book of Genesis, after their kind. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a third day. And so now God separates the waters that are around the earth, and it seems that he caused the seabeds to sink maybe, and the dry land began to emerge. So there was land beneath the water all the time, and God arranged the earth so that the land rose and there was land. Now, 2/3 of the earth is still covered by water, but we all live on dry land now. And so this is when that began to occur. And he said, "Let the earth bring forth grass," in verse 11. Let the earth bring forth grass. All this happened, interestingly enough, this happened before the creation of the sun and the moon, which didn't occur until the fourth day, which is interesting. So this means that plants must have had enough nourishment because the light that God created before the sun and the moon came from him. Just like it says in Revelation 21:23, that God is the light. And so God does not need the sun because he can be the light in himself. And this is an interesting way of looking at it, because some of the theories we talked about last week couldn't work like this. Those who propose the days of creation were not literal days, but successive ages of millions of years, are actually saying it would be hard to explain how plants survive without the sun for millions of years. I mean, that would seem to be impossible. No modern evolutionist would ever suggest that plant life is older than the moon and the sun. So you see that the days of creation, as they're delineated in Genesis, are at odds with the way that evolutionists believe that life evolved on the earth. Here we have plants and trees and all of that before we have the sun. And if the days are millions of years long, how could that be possible? So evidently, God is sufficient enough to create enough light for the earth. And it was so. The beginning of life on earth, directly created by God out of nothing, not slowing evolution over millions of years. God said it, it happened. And the other thing to point out is that the trees and the vegetation, as well as human beings, were created mature. In other words, they didn't grow. They were created mature. Some even suggest that this is maybe one of the reasons why we get such old ages for different fossils and rocks that are in the earth today, is because they were created mature. They have the appearance of age, but not actual age. And that's one possible answer, although dating methods are very, very subjective, and you can get any date you want depending on the data that you give the computer. So I'm not really sure about how reliable that is anyway. But so the earth brought forth grass and herb that yields seed, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself. So the plants were created not as seeds, but as full-grown plants already bearing seeds. Thus they were created as mature plants having the appearance of age. So I guess you could say the chicken did come before the egg. I've always thought about that in those terms. So everything according to its kind. And this appears 10 times in Genesis chapter 1. And I think whenever you see something happening that often, it definitely indicates that it's something that's significant, after its kind. So there's tremendous variation within kinds today, which we call species, or sometimes it's called baramins or baraminology. But it seems that the kinds are not able to change from one kind to another. And this is I'll talk more about this later. And God saw that it was good. God knows what is good, and he's not some vague, morally neutral power like the Force, but God is creating something that according to his sovereignty and inherent goodness, he would define as good. And so next day, verses 14 to 19, this is day 4. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens." So you see them in the expanse of the heavens. When you wake up, you see the sun, and then the moon comes up at night to give light on the earth, and it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. Obviously speaking here of the sun and the moon. And so this recounts the creation that occurred on the 4th day. He said, "Let them be for signs and seasons." And since the beginning of time, we have measured time by the sun, the rising and setting of the sun relative to where we are. And the moon and the stars have to do with tides and seasons. And so even navigation in the early days of seafaring was done with a sextant, which is measuring distance, measuring the way to navigate by the stars. And it's interesting to say at the end of this text, in the last thing he says before he moves to the next day, he made the stars also. I mean, it almost seems like an afterthought, doesn't it? Because when you consider the size of the earth and our solar system compared to the universe as we know it, it's infinitely small. And so it almost seems as if this is kind of like an afterthought. The size of our solar system compared to the size of other solar systems and universes. And so I think one of the things is, some people say, well, the author that wrote this didn't know how big the universe actually was, and so he just kind of added the stars as an afterthought. Another way of looking at it is that God wanted us to know about how unique this world was, including how humans created in the likeness of God compared to the truly immense size of the universe. And so it seems to me that in describing the events of creation in Genesis 1, God is not only communicating to us that the universe is big. I mean, we know more about that now, but that it's really unique. And I think that that's important. He wanted us to know that in the way that he says, by the way, he made the stars. And with all the other stars in our universe, I think people often wonder, is there life on other planets? When you take into account, this is one of the things that I read in one of my books, when you take into account all that is necessary for the sustenance of life as we know it, biological life, there are few planets able to support it. I don't think we know of one. that we've been able to find so far. Taking into account factors such as galaxy type, star location, star age, star mass, star color, distance from the stars, axis tilt, rotation period, surface of gravity, tidal force, magnetic field, oxygen quantity in the atmosphere and atmospheric pressure, and 20 other important factors, the probability that all 33 occurrences happening in any one planet is approximately 10 to the 42nd power. The total number of possible planets in the universe is 10 to the 22nd power. So essentially, looking at all the things that uniquely have to happen here for biological life to occur, it could never happen. The odds are just too great. In fact, I read one thing. At one time, the government spent $100 million a year looking for extraterrestrial intelligence called SETI. You've heard about this search for extraterrestrial life. It might have been more for them. It would probably be more profitable for them to spend $100 million trying to discover intelligent life in Washington, D.C. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. But the point is, here's my point. They've never discovered life on other planets, not even simple biological life. And we've had the rover on Mars for many years now. There's no biological life there. And so it just seems to me that when you're looking at the creation account of Genesis, this place is really unique. There had to be so many factors that could not have come together coincidentally for life to occur here. It must have been created. Fifth day, 20 to 23 of Genesis 1. So we see birds and sea creatures here in 20 to 23. Then God said, let the waters teem, and that word means let there be a lot of them, with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the heaven in the open expanse of the heavens. Again, in the expanse. God created great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind, and God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. God created these creatures fully mature with the capability of reproducing. That's the way they were created. And fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. And so here we see a variety of sea creatures and birds created seemingly at the same time with the capability of reproducing and populating the earth, not developing from a single cell organism over millions of years. Among the diversity of animals, many similar structures are found, and this is true. Birds, reptiles, mammals, and so forth. This argues at least, you could look at this in two ways. Think about this with mammals. Mammals have lungs, and they have kidneys, and they have eyes, and they have ears, and they have a lot of the same parts that we as human beings have, right? One way of looking at that, and the way the evolutionist looks at it, is that they all arose from a common ancestor, and therefore they share those organs because of that. And that makes sense if you look at it in a very simplistic way. But I think a wiser way of looking at it is that they were made by the same designer. In fact, we all have cars, right? All of our cars have wheels. Why is that? Because wheels work. They all have engines. They all have seats. They all have, now they have computers. And so the point is that God designed these specific parts of the body, and he uses his design in various different kinds of animals. Even though we're not animals, we still have similar parts to other animals. That's because God designed them, and God designed us as well. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that when we look at this section in Genesis 1, it talks about kinds. And it does seem that there is a fixed number of kinds which are incapable of crossing the barrier of one kind to another. But within the context of kinds, there's tremendous variation. We call that speciation. Simple illustration would be, look at the difference between a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. They're both canine, right? Even within the animal kingdom, like tigers and kittens, they're still feline. They're the same kinds of animals. And so a lot of times evolutionists would try to make us look like we believe that all the species that are happening today are different. That's a matter of evolution. We believe in speciation. We believe that there's lots of ability to change within kinds. We believe God programmed that into the DNA of those animals so that when they reproduce, they can produce all this variation. But the variation within kind, and here's the barrier that can't be crossed. You cannot interbreed between kinds. Between species, yes. Horses, all kinds of different species can interbreed and produce offspring, although if they're too different, it's problematic. But in the same sense, evolution is not occurring. For instance, the main issue that Darwin gives for evolution is, remember, went to Galapagos Islands, and he found the finches, and some of the finches had longer beaks, and some of the finches had shorter beaks, right? And they say that that's evolution. So the finches had longer beaks and shorter beaks. What were they when they started evolving, and what did they when they finished? They were finches. They didn't change. That's speciation. It's change within kind. As creationists, we believe that God created kinds, and that one kind cannot interbreed with another kind, and that one kind, and this shows in the fossil record, cannot become another kind. And so just thinking about that, another example is the peppered moth in England. Before the Industrial Revolution, there were two kinds of peppered moths. There was a black peppered moth, and there was a white peppered moth. The white peppered moths usually bred in the winter, and there were tons of them. They were everywhere. But then when the Industrial Revolution hit England, the soot began to cover the snow, and the predators could see the white moths more easily, and the black population of moths flourished. That's what we call natural selection. It's not evolution. They were peppered moths when they started. They were peppered moths when they finished. And so even within the vast variation that we see in species, there's no transition from one kind to another. And that's an important thing for believers to understand, because I think a lot of times we can get confused. The fossil record is marked by two great principles. First, we call stasis, which means that when a species first appears in the fossil record, it looks exactly the same as it does when it leaves the fossil record. And the other thing that we find in the fossil record is the sudden explosion of complex forms of life with no apparent ancestors. In fact, you can ask any evolutionists about this. Ask them about the Cambrian explosion. The Precambrian strata in the earth is the lowest strata on the fossil column. It's at the very bottom. And people would say it's the pre-flood stage. In the Cambrian strata, which is right above it, you have the sudden complex appearance of complex forms of life. Brachiopods, jellyfish, trilobites. These are very complex multicellular organisms, and they appear out of nowhere. And evolutionists cannot explain, and this is consistent through the fossil record, sudden explosion of completed kinds with no apparent ancestors. In fact, Philip Johnson said, he's an evolutionist, not a creationist. He said, if evolution means gradual change of one kind of organism into another kind, the outstanding characteristic of the fossil record is the absence of evidence for evolution. End of quote. That's an evolutionist. The biggest enemies of Darwin when he first published his Origin of Species were paleontologists, and those are people that study the fossil record. Another evolutionist by the name of Eldridge, he says, quote, we paleontologists have said that the history of life in the fossil record supports the gradual story of evolution, all the while knowing it does not, end of quote. These are evolution. I'm not quoting creationists here. So I know I digress, but I think it's important for us to understand that the Genesis account of creation, that God as the creator, makes more sense with what we see in science today than what they teach us about evolution. That there was an explosion and everything came out of that. Sixth day, 24:25. On the sixth day, God made the birds, sea animals, and land animals, and humans. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures, and these are primarily land animals, after their kind, cattle and creeping things, beasts of the earth after their kind, and it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind, and God saw that it was good. Next verse. Then God said, let us make man in our image, and according to our likeness, and let them rule over. This is where we first begin to see the dominion mandate. Over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And so he creates animals of all kinds, and tremendous, like I said, variation within kind, but no transgression from one kind to another. And then he creates human beings. He says, back to verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Two very similar words, not exactly the same. and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky. So first he talks about creating human beings in his image. And certainly can be a complicated subject, but let us make man in our image as a plural pronoun. God is speaking. I think all the Trinity participates in creation. We know in the very beginning, it says the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. In the book of Colossians, it talks about Jesus Christ being the creator. And of course, here it's talking about God being the creator. So I think the idea of the plural pronoun here is emphasizing the idea that all three members of the Trinity participated in creation. So God made human beings in his image. We're different from other created beings, from the animals. We're not animals. The means of the incarnation, I think, demonstrates that even though we're not equal in the same sense with God as Christ was, that God chose a human being to manifest himself to the world as an image bearer of God, perfect image bearer in Jesus. And we are, although we don't mean that we don't bear God's image perfectly. This means, I think, that human life, and this is some arguments are made from this, that human life has intrinsic value different from anything else, quite apart from the quality of life that individual may have experienced, because they are made in the image of God. And I believe that this is true of all human beings are made in the image of God. And I think when we walk in the Spirit, we show the world what God is like. The image of God in man is marred because of the fall. But the vestiges of God's image in all human beings are still seen today. And one of the ways that you can distinguish it is between looking at how we're different from the animals. Some of the instances in which we're different from the animals is we have rationality. We have the ability to reason. We look for things. Things need to make sense to this. To us. Did you ever wonder why when someone says something to you and it contradicts your rationality, you go, what? We have rationality because God has a rational component to his being. And so when he creates a being in his image, it shares that rational component of rationality. Morality. All human beings have a basic sense of right and wrong. Of course, it's not always consistent with God's word, and it can change depending on your culture, but there's a general sense in which human beings have a sense of right and wrong. And when you do something that's wrong, you feel what we call your conscience bothers you. I remember having issues with my conscience long before I became a believer and knew about God's standards of morality. So, I mean, and you could see this in other cultures. Other cultures have the same basic standards of morality that we do. It's wrong to steal. It's wrong to cheat. It's wrong to kill. All of this comes from the fact that even though the image of God has fallen in human beings, we were all created by a God who himself is moral. And so the stamp of his morality is on all human beings, although it has been compromised because of the fall. So we all have a conscience. And if you violate your conscience over and over again, you can come to the place where you actually can do something terrible and not feel bad about it. But nobody is born a sociopath. I think that that's something that develops. If you violate your conscience over and over and over again, you can do something really bad and not even feel bad about it. Most people are not like that because they're created in God's image and God is moral. Another thing is we have a spirit. We have a spirit. I don't think animals have spirit. They do seem to possess some of the attributes of personality. Especially mammals, I've noticed. I've never seen personality in a reptile or an insect, but mammals do seem to be happy when you come home, right? They're glad to see you, and I don't know that they have a conscience. When they do something wrong, I think they more fear the consequences of getting slapped with a paper or something like that than they do. In other words, when the dog pees on the carpet, I don't think he feels bad about peeing on the carpet. I think he kind of feels afraid of what's going to happen to him. And you're not going to abuse your animals. The Bible does say, blessed is the man who regards the life of his beasts. We should be kind to animals. We should be kind to animals. And horses, I don't know, horses are pretty smart too. But I don't think that they have a spirit. And I think that's unique because what is God? He's a spirit. So if God creates a human being in his image, it means that we must possess a spirit. And I think when the Bible says you were dead in trespasses and sin, it's saying that in that sense you were spiritually dead. And when you look at 1 Corinthians 2, it explains very carefully that God communicates to us through his Spirit. We are convicted by the Spirit. We experience the conviction of the Holy Spirit, the leading of the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit comes alive, and all of a sudden we can have a relationship with God because we're not spiritually dead anymore. And so I think human beings have a spirit. Some believe that the spirit is separate from the soul, and some believe that the soul and the spirit are combined to form the non-material man. There's different ideas about the difference between the soul and the spirit. Some believe that the soul and the spirit are separate. They're called trichotomists. Some believe that the soul and the spirit are combined to form the non-material man, and they're called dichotomists. But every person that understands the scripture believes we have a spirit because we're created in God's image. We also have complex communication. This is something different than the animals. I mean, I know whales have sonar and dogs bark, but I think it's not complex, right? I've never read a book written by an animal. Have you? They don't write books. You can't have a conversation in the same sense that, with an animal that you have with a human being. And most of the time when we believe that animals are speaking to us, we're projecting what we think they would say. I talk for all of our dogs. You know, I can tell you what they're thinking. I don't really know what they're thinking, but I suppose I know what they're thinking. You know, and so in a sense, complex communication is unique to human beings. It's not the same in the animal kingdom. Self-awareness, I think that's a big one. There's 3 ways in which self-awareness makes us different than the animals. In the cognitive world, we have thoughts, beliefs. We have convictions, things that we think through, and we come to a conviction based upon what we believe. We have biases. We have assumptions, values, mental activity that is infinitely more complex. We have emotions, feelings, moods, although I would say some animals do seem to exhibit emotions. So whether animals have souls or not, I'm not entirely convinced. But behavior in the world, we have unique things that are typical of us. Language, behaviors, actions. We think about how our behavior influences and affects someone else. I don't really think animals do that in the sense that maybe they might warn them, don't get close to my food or something like that. But I don't think that they evaluate their relationships with other animals in the same way that we relate to other humans. And that's part of self-awareness. I don't think they're aware of power, culture. They don't know what it means to trust, I don't think, to the same degree. Another thing that's unique about human beings is we laugh. Animals don't laugh. I know you're thinking about hyenas. They're not laughing, they're getting ready to eat you. It's not something that they do because they're happy. It's a feeding frenzy. Animals don't laugh. God laughs because God laughs. We can laugh too. And you know what? Laughing is good. Isn't it good? It releases stress. You know, some people need to laugh more. Here's the final one I'll cover today. Creativity. Creativity. Now, birds make nests, beavers make dams, and they make very simple structures. But how many of you have flown at 600 miles an hour in a jet at 30,000 feet while sipping on a Coke? If you've flown in a jet, we all have, right? And so human beings have the ability to make things, complicated things, not out of nothing like God. We use existing materials, and the things that we make are rather simple compared to the things that God makes. But we have creativity because why? God is the creator. And so when God creates a being in his image, it has creativity. So in a sense, in a very real sense, especially those of us who walk in the Spirit and who follow the Lord and who love the Lord, we bear the image of God to the world. I remember seeing my first son born, Jeremiah. It was long, arduous labor, 28 hours. It was brutal. But he finally came out, and I was in the room. I was there for all my children's birth, and when he came out of the womb, it was like watching a miracle. I couldn't believe it. I mean, this is really happening. It would be like if I got down on the floor and I said, watch this, I can fly up to the ceiling, and you guys would all look, whoa. It was like witnessing a miracle. And those of you who have seen the birth of a child, you know. My mom, who was not a believer, at least for a long time, said, I knew there was a God when I had a baby. When I saw Jeremiah, he looked just like me. I remember thinking, wow, he looks just like me. He looks like a doll of me. And so here's the point. You love your children because they come from you. They bear your image. I think God has that same affection towards us. We're created in his image. And the other thing I would add to that is that even though it's marred because of sin, all human beings are created in God's image. All human beings are. And I think that, just to think about, if God values human beings and created them in his own image, then so should we. I would think, how can we impute value to others who do not share our belief system, whose lifestyles are condemned in Scripture? How can we impute value and speak the truth at the same time and love them? It's a tough thing to do, isn't it? We've got to do it better. I just think that there's got to be a better way to engage the world in which we live. Because we haven't done really good there for a long time. So he says, let them have dominion. We have dominion. We could read the rest of the chapter here. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. We'll talk about that in a little while, not today. I think that's kind of obvious, but it's more in question today than it ever has been. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. And again, to be fruitful and multiply, they must have been capable of that from the beginning. Which means that sexuality has a proper and righteous demonstration, which is not often taught today as much as it should be. And fill the earth. The idea is populate it. In fact, I looked at a study the other day, and according to the current population rate of the earth, if the earth was over 10,000 years old, there would be a human being in every square foot of the earth today. And of course, there's been plagues and famines, but if human beings have been here for 250,000 to 1 million years, and the population rate is infinitely small, the earth would not have enough room for all the people. Scientifically, it just doesn't work. And subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea. We have dominion, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So God has given us dominion. Before God ever created man, he decreed that man would have dominion over the earth. Man's preeminence of the created order and his ability to affect his environment is no accident. In other words, we actually have control to a degree. And of course, to a degree, we don't. You can't control the weather. With all our technology today, we're at the mercy of the weather. But by and large, here's my point about dominion. God gave us dominion. In fact, it says that Jesus Christ actually created the world for himself, but God has given us dominion. And the idea is now we are stewards of creation. We're stewards of creation. It's not ours to abuse and do whatever we want to with. Now, let me point out, the earth is not our mother. We did not come from the earth. We were created by God. But God created this world for us. And in a sense, I think we should do our best to care for it in responsible ways. Just because we have dominion doesn't mean that we have a mandate to destroy it. In fact, it's the only one we got. And so when we mess this one up, it's over. And so I think as believers, as Christians who know the Creator and have a relationship with the Creator, it would seem that we should be, of all people, very, very careful about how we treat the world. We didn't come from it. We're not animals. The earth is not our mother. We don't place the earth above human beings. But by the same token, I think we should be very careful to take care of it. We should take this command seriously. So we have a couple of minutes for questions, if anybody has a question. I know I dumped a lot of science on you today, so. Dave?
I have a little theory. I think it's biblical, body, soul, spirit, about animals. I believe the animals have some sort of a soul. If you think of the soul as the immaterial part of the animal looking toward the earth, the mind of an animal is like its soul. I agree with you that that an animal doesn't have a spirit. So when they die, they just die. Their mind dies.
You don't think there's going to be animals in heaven?
Huh?
No animals in heaven?
I don't know.
The Lord's coming
really
on
don't
horses,
know
and so
that.
there's gonna-
I wouldn't mind if there were animals, and I think with regard to some animals in my past that I would hope that they're there. And
Yeah, maybe God knows he'll give us a
Yeah.
chance to see him again. They do seem to show personality, though. Some of them do. Only mammals. I haven't seen it in reptiles and stuff like that. Yes?
I had a question. You talked about how all the species can breed only within their own kind.
Yes, you understood correctly.
Why do some people believe that angels got together with human beings and procreated?
Because it's a hard thing to say. I mean, really, he's talking about Genesis 6, where it says, the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took for them wives, and then there were giants in the earth. So the problem with that view is that angels are spirits, and a spirit cannot produce a physical result unless it's a miracle of creation. So, but then it does seem to suggest that after that happened, whatever it was, God destroyed the earth. I mean, it was really bad, whatever happened, because God said, I can't work with this anymore. I'm going to have to start over. So that's debated. Some say it was the line of Seth, and that's why it was such a tragedy, because the line of Seth, the Messiah would come through the line of Seth, and so if the line of Seth was polluted, then the Christ would not have been able to come through the line of Seth. So that's one idea. Dale?
Some people also believe that it was a curse of demon possession.
Yeah,
That took over human bodies.
that's possible. A demon could possess the body of a human male, and that human male could procreate with another human woman, and maybe somehow the evil essence and power of the evil spirit could be, because it says after that there were giants in the earth, Nephilim, which generally means giants. And so, it's one of those things where I wrote a paper on it when I was in seminary, and I presented that it was the line of Seth because I knew that's what the professor believed.
As a
But-
person in seminary, smart man.
But I'm not really sure. To me, the big barrier is demon possession is possible. I think that's possible. But how an angel could procreate since they're a spirit, I don't know how without a miracle of creation. It seems only God can create.
It's a different genus, which is the same as kind. So
Okay. But again, right, within the same kinds. And different, it's important to look at it this way because we have all of these species on the earth today. All of those species could never have fit on the ark. But if you look at it in terms of kinds, I think there's 430 something different kinds, thousands of different species. So if you limit the creation to kinds, then it makes more sense in terms of what we see later on in the Bible. It's important. A lot of Christians don't understand that. A lot of Christians think that natural selection is evolution. It's not. You could say it's macroevolution, but it's not microevolution. It's not changing from one kind to another. And then you have the huge barrier of inorganic matter becoming organic matter. That just never happens. Science will never be able to create a living cell. I heard that from the most famous evolutionary biologist in a debate in 1975. That's what he said word for word. But we're expected to believe it happened by accident. No. Okay, thank you. Shalom.
One more thing between